Hello and welcome to the Symposium. My name's Carl and today I'm going to be talking about the Melian Dialogue and what it reveals to us about the nature of morality in times of conflict. So it begins with the Peloponnesian War between Sparta and Athens. Now I'm not going to go into the details of that because it's very complex, but in essence Sparta declares war on Athens after declaring that they have broken a peace. And the recrimination and bitterness that arises from this is quite staggering, actually, considering they were both allies against the Persians previously. But Athens had effectively become an empire out of the Delian League, and the Spartans, as Thucydides informs us, primarily found the Athenian state growing in power and found that a threat to their own hegemony of Greece. And so Thucydides thought that this war was inevitable. And so, in the process of conquering the Aegean Sea, the Athenians came to the island of Melos, which was a Spartan colony, or a Lacedaemonian colony. Lacedaemon being the area of Greece that Sparta is situated in and had hegemony over. And so the terms Lacedaemonian and Spartan are used interchangeably. But the other islands in the area had submitted willingly to the Athenians, understanding that, well, the Athenians had far too strong a military force for them to resist. But the Melians wished to remain neutral. And so when the Athenians arrive at Melos with an overwhelming force, the Melian rulers send out their own delegation to meet with the Athenians. Now, the Athenians are annoyed that they're not brought before the people of Melos, and so they recognize that this means that rhetorical arguments and persuasion have been taken off of the table. And in return, the Melians recognize that they are being presented with a very stark and binary choice: slavery or war. The two sides dance around the issue somewhat, until the Athenians simply nail it down with remarkable bluntness. The Athenians say, "For ourselves, we shall not trouble you with specious pretences, either of how we have a right to our empire because we overthrew the Mede, the Persian, or are now attacking you because of wrong that you have done to us, and make a long speech which would not be believed. And in return we hope that you, instead of thinking to influence us, by saying that you did not join with the Lacedaemonians, although they're colonists, or that you have done us no wrong, will aim at what is feasible, holding in view the real sentiments of us both. Since you know as well as we do that right, as long as the world goes, is only in question between equals in power. While the strong do what they can, the weak suffer what they must." This reveals the underlying nature of moral sentiment as viewed by the Athenians. Right is a question of equals between equals in power. Therefore, morality must have its basis in power. The ability of each side to wound the other, with the contest being in doubt, is, according to the Athenian delegation, the only place on which a moral conversation can happen. Or else, the strong will do what they can and the weak will suffer what they must. It reduces all of this to a raw power calculation, dictating interest and ability as if all other questions have already been resolved. And as the Melians point out, they say, "As we think at any rate it is expedient, we speak as we are obliged, since you enjoin us to let right alone and talk only of interest, that you should not destroy what is our common protection, the privilege of being allowed in danger to invoke what is fair and right, and even to profit by arguments not strictly valid if they can be got to pass current. And if you are as much interested in this as any, as your fall would be a signal for the heaviest vengeance, an example for the world to mediate upon." So a very good response by the Melians there, to say, well, look, it's the common protection of everyone, regardless of their circumstances, to appeal to justice, to appeal to what is fair and right, with the assumption that the person with whom you are dealing understands that there can be such an abstract thing as justice, as fairness, as righteousness. This is essentially a warning to the Athenians, saying, well, look, if you fall, then why shouldn't the heaviest vengeance also fall upon you if you would lay down the heaviest vengeance on someone else? This is essentially saying, be careful what you wish for, be careful what you do, because you might just get what you deserve. If you deal in others this way, this is how you shall be dealt with in turn. And the high-handed arrogance of the Athenians to think that they are above justice and morality will not be forgotten. However, the Athenians simply wave such concerns away. Prudence might warn, but in this moment, the Melians are trapped, and the Athenians cannot be stopped. And so the Athenians simply say, the end of our empire, if end it should, does not frighten us. A rival empire like Lacedaemon, even if Lacedaemon was our real antagonist, is not so terrible to the vanquished as subjects who by themselves attack and overpower their rulers. This, however, is a risk that we are content to take. We will now proceed to show you that we are come here in the interest of our empire, and that we shall say what we are going to say for the preservation of your country, as we would fain exercise that empire over you without trouble, and see you preserved for the good of us both. It's quite a brutal response, very dark. This presents the Melians with a rather sad dilemma, and they ask why it should be good for them to submit and be subject to Athens, to which the Athenians reply very simply that they will not suffer the worst, and Athens gains by not destroying them, keeping them as a tributary subject. But Athens cannot leave Melos as neutral. As the Athenians say, your hostility cannot so much hurt us, as your friendship will be an argument to our subjects of our weakness, and your enmity of our power. So what they are saying there is that if we let you alone, then other people will see that there is a choice, that there is an option for us to be independent of Athens, which will threaten the structural integrity of the empire itself. The Athenians essentially wish to take the Assyrian approach and rule by strength, rather than rule by justice. The Melians push back on this, asking if this is their subjects' view of equity, fairness, but the Athenians immediately stonewall this line of inquiry. The Athenians say, as far as right goes, they think one has as much of it as the other, and if any maintain their independence, it is because they are strong, and that if we do not molest them, it is because we are afraid, so that besides extending our empire, we should gain security by your subjugation. The fact that you are islanders and weaker than others, rendering it all the more important that you should not succeed in baffling the masters of the sea. So they are saying that in other people's minds, the legend, the reputation of Athens will be damaged if you are simply left alone, and it is that reputation that is keeping the others in line. So the Melians decide to then change perspective, observing that this gives the Athenians license to attack any neutral state with impunity, and they reply with, how can you avoid making enemies of all existing neutrals, who shall look at the case from it that one day or another you will attack them? And what is this but to make greater the enemies that you have already, and to force others who become so, to become so, who would otherwise have never have thought of it? The Melians have now abandoned the idea of justice in their argument, speaking directly to the Athenians' interests. They will create enemies where none before existed. Surely Athens' power is not unlimited. But again, the Athenians brush this off. The potential threat of a war on the continent, or further wars on the continent, as they're already embroiled in one, is not their concern. Theirs is the empire of islands, and Athens with its long walls has connected itself to the sea to effectively make itself an island. Again, the Athenians do not allow themselves to be sidetracked into abstract concerns such as future dangers. So the Melians appeal to bravery in an attempt to possibly curry favour with the Athenians. But again, the Athenians say that this is not a question of shame and honour, but of self-preservation. And you can see now that there is nothing that Athens will broach on the topic: total submission or total destruction. They are offering the Melians a simple choice: either total submission or total destruction. To which the Melians say, we know that the fortune of war is sometimes more impartial than the disproportion of numbers might lead one to suppose. To submit is to give ourselves over to despair, while action still preserves us for a hope that we may stand erect. But no matter how optimistic the Emelians might be, they simply do not have the resources to fight Athens, and both sides know it. The Athenians preempt the next appeal the Melians would make, which is a religious one. Hope, danger's comforter, may be indulged in by those who have abundant resources, if not without loss, at all events without ruin. But its nature is to be extravagant, and those who go so far as to put their all upon the venture see in it its true colours only when they are ruined. But so long as the discovery would enable them to guard against it, it is never found wanting. Let this not be the case with you, who are weak, and hang on a single turn of the scale, nor be like the vulgar, who, abandoning such security as human means may still afford, when visible hopes fail them in extremity, turn to invisible, to prophecies and oracles, and other such inventions that delude men with hopes to their destruction. The Athenians are blocking off all avenues of argument for the Melians, by reducing everything to a material reliance on brute force, the one factor upon which they simply cannot be undone, at least not in the immediate circumstances. So the Melians respond with an appeal to religion. We trust that the gods may grant us fortune as good as yours, since we are just men fighting against unjust, and that we want in power, what we want in power will be made up by the alliance of the Lacedaemonians, who are bound, if only for very shame, to come to the aid of their kindred. Our confidence, therefore, is not so utterly irrational. However, no appeal to the gods will dissuade the Athenians, who can merely point to the existence of the current state of affairs as a proof that they are following a divine ordinance. And they reply with this: of the gods we believe, and of men we know, that by a necessary law of their nature they rule wherever they can, and it is not as if we were the first to make this law, or to act upon it when it was made. We found it existing before us, and shall leave it to exist forever after us. All we do is to make use of it, knowing that you and everybody else, having the same power as we have, would do the same as we do. Thus, as far as the gods are concerned, we have no fear and no reason to fear that we shall be at a disadvantage. And that's interesting, because we will see if everyone else would do as Athens would do, given the same situation. But anyway, at this point, all immaterial things have been abandoned. Morality, superstition, religion. The Athenians turn directly to the consequent. They speak again in terms of interests and power, and say, the Lacedaemonians, when their own interests or their country's laws are in question, are the worthiest men alive. Of their conduct towards others much might be said, but no clearer idea of it could be given them by shortly saying that of all the men we know, they are the most conspicuous in considering what is agreeable honourable, and what is expedient just. Such a way of thinking does not promise much for the safety which you now unreasonably count upon. You can imagine that after having war declared on them by Sparta, the Athenians have a relatively negative view of Sparta, thinking that Sparta views all things in this way as well. But again, we will see if that turns out to be true. The Melians, however, recognize the opening that has been presented to them in the Athenian argument, and on the same terms as the Athenians laid out for forcing neutral islands to submit, lest their other vassals think they be too weak to enforce their fidelity, the Spartans must now come to the defence of Melos, lest the Spartans' allies lose confidence in Spartan power. The Melians believe that, despite the danger, the Spartans will act because of blood ties and proximity, as well as their own reputation. But the Athenians rebuke this by observing that they are the ones who are the masters of the sea. The Spartans are not, and so the danger to the Spartans is too great for them to come to Melos' aid. After another attempt by the Melians to open the argument that Sparta might come, the Athenians stamp this down firmly and end the dialogue with the following. We are struck by the fact that, after saying that you would consult for the safety of your country, in all this discussion you have mentioned nothing which men might trust in and think to be saved by. Your strongest arguments depend on hope and the future. Your actual resources are too scanty, as compared with those arrayed against you, for you to come out victorious. You will therefore show great blindness of judgment unless, after allowing us to retire, you can find some counsel more prudent than this. You will surely not be caught by that idea of disgrace, which in dangers that are disgraceful and at the same time too plain to be mistaken, proves so fatal to mankind, since in too many cases the very men that have their eyes perfectly open to what they are rushing into, let the thing called disgrace, by the mere influence of a seductive name, lead them on to a point at which they become so enslaved by the phrase as in fact to fall wilfully into hopeless disaster, and incur disgrace more disgraceful as the companion of error, than when it comes as the result of misfortune. This, if you are well advised, you will guard against, and you will not think it dishonourable to submit to the greatest city in Hellas, when it makes you the moderate offer of becoming its tributary ally, without ceasing to enjoy the country that belongs to you, nor when you have the choice given to you between war and security will you be so blinded as to choose the worse. And it is certain that those who do not yield to their equals, who keep terms with their superiors and are moderate towards their inferiors, on the whole succeed best. Think over the matter, therefore, after our withdrawal, and reflect once and again that it is for your country that you are consulting, that you do not have more than one, and that upon what this one deliberation depends its prosperity or ruin. This is the cold, hard reality of the situation for Milos, as brutally put down by the Athenians, just slammed down on the table. You have no choices here. The Athenian delegation retires, but the Melians refuse to capitulate, and simply send back the same answer to the Athenians. And so the siege of Milos begins. And the Melians fight bravely, and they enjoy some minor successes, but in the end they are conquered by the Athenians, who are as good to their word as one might expect them to be. The grown men who are captured are simply executed, the women and children are sold as slaves, and the Athenians colonize Milos with 500 people from Attica. After the Athenians lost the Peloponnesian War, a decade later, Corinth and Thebes demanded that Athens was destroyed and all of its citizens enslaved, not because of what happened on Milos, but the same situation is still demanded of Athens that they had demanded of Milos. But it was Sparta that refused this demand, and they did it for sentimental reasons, because of Athens' service against the Persians when all of Greece was in danger, and instead of tearing Athens down, burning it, killing the men and enslaving the women and children, they decided to impose their own rule, a rule of oligarchs, on Athens. And so the question is, did Athens actually deserve it? Did they deserve to have Athens have the Spartans do to them what they did to the Melians? Because, I mean, after all, they had shown themselves to be cruel, unjust, unforgiving, tyrannical, and narcissistic in their treatment of Milos. They revealed that they viewed power as being between equals only, and the unfortunate position of the weak in relation to the strong was one that simply didn't have to be considered. It is quite fortunate for the Athenians that not all of the world agreed on their determination on the relation between power and morality, and that the Spartans themselves, of all the people in the world, did not agree that might makes right.